My name is Julia Watkins, and the day I returned home to announce my engagement, my mother looked me in the eye and said, "You don't deserve to be a wife." That moment didn't just break me. It lit a fire inside me to uncover why my own family wanted to destroy the one thing that brought me joy, and to make sure they never had that power again. Hey there, before we dive in, tell me where you're watching this video from. I love hearing your stories too, so drop your location in the comments. I came back to Charleston to celebrate. That's what I told myself when the plane touched down and I smelled that familiar marshy air. I hadn't been home in nearly a year, and despite everything, I really thought this trip would be different. My fiancé, Nathan, had proposed just 2 weeks earlier under the Spanish moss trees in Savannah. It was quiet, romantic, exactly the kind of moment I'd always dreamed about. And now I wanted to share that dream with the people who raised me. My parents, Linda and George Watkins. Of course they'd be thrilled, right? Their only daughter getting married. That naive hope barely lasted 10 minutes. I walked into the same living room I used to build pillow forts in as a kid. Nathan was behind me, suitcase in hand, giving me that patient smile he always had. I called out a cheerful, "Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad." My mother looked up from the armrest, eyes sharp like the edge of a blade. "What are you doing here?" she asked. It wasn't a question laced with curiosity. It was an accusation. We came to tell you something," I said, pushing past the awkwardness and slipping off my coat. "Good news." She folded her arms. My father, sitting silently in the corner with a crossword on his lap, didn't even glance up. I sat on the edge of the floral couch, a couch I wasn't allowed to sit on with snacks as a kid, and took a breath. "Nathan and I are engaged. We're getting married in October," and I smiled, reaching for her hand. "I'd really love to have the wedding here in Charleston, maybe even in the garden if it's still blooming that time of year." I stopped, because Linda, my own mother, burst out laughing. A loud, guttural kind of laugh that filled the room and sucked all the warmth out of it. "You," she scoffed. "A wife? Oh, sweetie, don't be ridiculous." I blinked. Nathan's hand gripped mine tighter. He didn't say anything, he's good at letting me speak first. But I could feel the tension rolling off of him like a storm gathering. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice thin. She stood and began to pace slowly, as if searching for just the right cruel phrase to leave a scar. "You couldn't keep a college boyfriend. You don't even live in Charleston anymore. And now you waltz in here expecting us to throw confetti because some man was foolish enough to put a ring on your finger." I looked at my father then, still not speaking. He just adjusted his glasses and crossed his arms. My throat burned. "Nathan is not some man. He's the love of my life, and this is supposed to be a celebration." Linda stopped pacing. Her arms were crossed. Her expression was flat. "If you want a celebration, try someone else's house," she said, "because we're not pretending for you." "I'm not asking you to pretend," I said slowly, carefully. "I'm asking you to be happy for me." She turned her back on me. "I'm asking too much, apparently," I added. There was a long silence. Only the ticking of the old grandfather clock filled the space. "You always were a dreamer," Linda said finally, "just like your aunt, and look where that got her." Nathan cleared his throat. "Mrs. Watkins," he began, polite but firm. "We came here in good faith. Julia loves this place. She loves you, and she wanted this to be a shared moment." Linda turned around, sharp. "And I suppose you think you're saving her," she snapped. "That's adorable." It hit me like a punch. The hatred wasn't about me being too distant or dramatic or disobedient, it was about control. I wasn't asking for permission, I was declaring independence, and that terrified them. My heart thudded in my chest as I stood up, still clutching Nathan's hand. I was shaking, but I kept my chin high. "I thought coming home would feel like a return," I said. "But this isn't home anymore." I looked around the room, once filled with memories, now a museum of cold disapproval. And I saw it clearly for the first time. Their love had terms. Their support came with strings, and I wasn't playing that game anymore. Nathan opened the door behind me. I stepped through it without another word, but as I crossed the porch, I turned back one last time. "I'm getting married," I said, "whether you're part of it or not." Linda didn't respond, but I saw my father flinch. It wasn't the welcome I'd imagined, but it was the beginning of a war I hadn't realized I needed to win. That night, the Charleston harbor air smelled like salt and jasmine. Nathan and I walked in silence for a while, our shoes tapping gently on the worn wooden boards of the pier. The sun had just dipped beneath the horizon, casting the sky in a bruised violet. Tourists passed by, laughing, holding ice cream, hand in hand. It should have been us. But instead of joy, I felt hollow. He didn't push me to talk. He never does. He knows me well enough to wait until I'm ready, and when I finally spoke, it wasn't graceful. I don't know why I thought they'd be happy for me. Nathan's hand brushed mine. Because you hoped they'd changed. I wanted just a tiny piece of normal, a smile, a hug. I paused, wiping at my eyes even though I hadn't cried yet. Is that really asking too much? They're afraid of losing control, he said. This marriage, it shifts things. You're not their little girl anymore. I let out a shaky laugh. I haven't been their little girl in over a decade. Nathan stopped walking and turned to face me. No, but this, you choosing your happiness, your partner, your future, this makes it real. And some people don't know how to handle a woman who sets her own course. I looked up at him. He always had a way of saying the right thing without sugarcoating it. Do you think I'm overreacting? Not even close. We sat on a bench facing the water. Boats rocked gently in the distance, and the soft lapping of the waves filled the quiet spaces between us. I thought maybe we could host a brunch, I murmured. Use the backyard, maybe. Even if they're cold, maybe the neighbors and cousins will show up, something simple. I still want pieces of home in our wedding, even if I couldn't finish the sentence. Nathan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I think that's brave. Brave or delusional, he chuckled. Both, but in the best way. You don't give up easily. I tilted my head, watching his face. Would you still marry me if my parents decide to burn it all down? Jules, he said softly, reaching for my hand again. I'd marry you if we had to do it barefoot in a gas station parking lot. A real laugh escaped me then, and for a moment the pain eased. We'll get through this, he said. Together, whatever they throw at us. The wind picked up slightly, ruffling his dark hair and sending a chill up my spine. He noticed and shrugged out of his jacket, wrapping it around my shoulders without a word. Maybe we just invite the people who matter, I said. Danielle, my cousin, Tina, your sister, forget the rest. Or, he offered gently, we can still try the brunch idea. Let them show their colors in the daylight. You don't have to pretend they're supportive. But maybe this is your chance to make peace with the past on your terms. I sat back against the bench, eyes fixed on the rippling water. Maybe that was the key, not to erase the pain, but to stop letting it direct the script of my life. I wasn't that scared girl anymore, the one who tiptoed around my mother's moods or tried to earn a sliver of praise from my father's silence. I'm not asking for their blessing, I said out loud, more to myself than to Nathan. I'm giving myself permission to want something beautiful. Nathan smiled and kissed my knuckles. Exactly. We stayed at the harbor until the stars blinked into place. The quiet, the distance from their house, the rhythm of the water, all of it calmed the storm that had roared inside me since earlier that afternoon. When we finally rose to leave, I glanced back at the water one last time. It was still, but I wasn't. I was in motion now. The next morning, I opened my laptop, stared at a blank document titled Wedding to Do, and took a deep breath. I hadn't told Nathan yet, but a part of me hoped that by pushing forward, by filling the spaces with flowers and music and guest lists, I could soften the sting of what happened in that living room. Hope and practicality, two things I inherited from my grandmother, not my mother. I made a list. It helped calm my mind. Venue, still possibly the family garden. Florist, that downtown place with the window full of lavender. Music, live jazz trio, preferably local. Guest list. That part stung. I skipped it. Nathan had gone out to meet with an old colleague over coffee. It gave me space. I needed space. Because the house, the one I'd grown up in, felt like walking on glass in bare feet now. Every corner echoed with old expectations and fresh resentment. I found Mom in the kitchen a few hours later, opening the refrigerator with a sharp clatter. She didn't look at me when she spoke. So, still pretending this wedding is happening here. I held the counter edge, grounding myself. It's not pretend, it is happening. She snorted, buttering toast like it had personally offended her. You're going to ruin the hydrangeas with your little brunch. You know that, right? It's a brunch, not a monster truck rally. I kept my tone calm, even when everything inside me screamed. She turned to face me finally, leaning on the kitchen island like a judge about to deliver sentencing. "You never learn to listen," she said. "Always pushing, always acting like you know better. Because I wanted something for myself. Because you want a man more than you want your family." That landed hard. I stared at her, stunned. "That's not true." "Isn't it?" she said, cold as marble. "He says jump, and you show up with a ring." I could feel the sting rise in my throat, but I pressed it down. "You're wrong about him and about me." She shook her head and turned away. "We'll see if he even shows up," she muttered. That one I didn't let slide. I stepped forward, my voice firmer. "You don't get to make predictions about my relationship because you're bitter about your own." She froze. I don't think anyone had ever said that to her. Not Dad. Certainly not me. When she finally looked back, her face was blank, but her eyes were burning. "Don't mistake a ring for immunity, Julia. Life has a way of humbling women like you." I left the room before I said something unforgivable. Women like me? No. What she meant was women who leave, who don't beg, who don't stay small. That night I emailed the florist, booked the jazz trio, and I chose peonies, lush, defiant blooms that don't care if they're loved or not. 2 days later, I was picking up a tablecloth sample from the rental place downtown when I bumped into my dad on the sidewalk. George Watkins, the man of few words. The man who used to carry me on his shoulders at parades but now treated me like a coffee stain on his sleeve. He looked at the fabric sample in my hand, then up at me. "You're really doing it, huh?" "I am," I said, no fear, not anymore. He looked tired, or maybe I was finally seeing him without the pedestal. "Your mother's not going to make this easy," he said quietly. "I know," he nodded once. "You were always stubborn, just like her." "No," I said, "I'm just not afraid of her anymore." He didn't reply, but I caught something flicker in his face, a crack, a hesitation. Then, like always, he turned and walked away. That night I sat beside Nathan on the porch steps. We shared a blanket. He sipped his coffee while I sorted through vendor emails and photos of bouquet arrangements. "I booked the florist," I said. He smiled. "Which one?" "The one with the lavender window." He kissed my temple and didn't ask how the rest of the day went. That's why I loved him. Sometimes love is not grand declarations. It's silent understanding. It's a man who lets you rebuild your dream without demanding to redesign it. Tomorrow, we would finalize the brunch list. Tomorrow, I would text Danielle. But tonight, I let myself believe, really believe, that this wedding could still be mine. Not a performance for family approval. Not a desperate grasp at peace, but a reclaiming. The next morning, the dining room was filled with sun and silence. I'd cleared the long wooden table myself, dusting off years of forgotten family photos, old candles, and a basket of fake fruit that had become more sculpture than decoration. If we were really doing this brunch, I needed a space that felt welcoming, not judgmental, and for once, not hers. I laid out the fabric samples, a list of potential dishes, even a color-coded seating chart, because yes, apparently even a simple brunch required diplomacy when the guest list included people like my Aunt Bate and the neighbor who once accused our dog of emotional terrorism. I didn't hear the knock at first. It was only when I heard the front door creak open and a familiar voice call out, "Still planning to feed the enemy," that I looked up, heart skipping. "Danielle." I nearly tripped over the rug getting to the foyer. Danielle Brighton, my best friend from high school. The girl who taught me how to parallel park, how to sneak cookies out of Linda's kitchen undetected, and how to draw eyeliner wings sharp enough to survive prom night tears. We hadn't seen each other in 3 years. She was standing there in jeans, a coral blouse, and holding, of all things, a bottle of champagne and a grocery bag. "You didn't think I'd let you host a southern brunch without mimosas and reinforcements, did you?" I hugged her so hard she laughed and nearly dropped the champagne. "What are you doing here? I thought you were still in Nashville." "I was, but Tina called me, told me what your mother said." She gave me a knowing look. "Figured you might need someone in your corner." I blinked fast. It wasn't the kind of gesture I was used to anymore, unconditional, uncomplicated love. For a second, I forgot how to receive it. We got to work. Within an hour, the house smelled like cinnamon pecans and oven-warmed biscuits. I hadn't realized how lonely the planning had been until Danielle filled the room with music, laughter, and the occasional sarcastic impression of Linda's voice. "Oh, you're using those plates," she drawled, fake posh. "You'll never trap a man with chipped porcelain." I burst out laughing, dropping a spoon into the deviled eggs. "I've missed you," I said, wiping my eyes. "You've missed yourself," she said, not missing a beat. "That's what they've taken from you." I went quiet because she wasn't wrong. "They didn't just try to ruin your wedding," she continued, laying out place cards like she was handling playing cards. "They tried to convince you that your joy was something shameful, that loving someone fully, bravely was a weakness." I looked at her. "How do you always know exactly what to say?" "Because I watched them shrink you," she said, softer now. "Every Christmas, every dance recital, and I also watched you become someone bigger than all of it." The kitchen timer dinged. She walked over and pulled out the scones, but I stood still, rooted in a feeling I hadn't had in months, maybe years. Recognition, not just from her, from myself. I wasn't the girl asking permission anymore. I was the woman building her own table, brunch and all. Later, as we hung fresh garlands over the doorframe and tied ribbons to the chairs, I heard the floor creak. I turned. My father stood at the top of the stairs, watching. He said nothing, just stared, frowning. Danielle looked over her shoulder at him. "Oh, look," she said brightly. "Decoration in human form." I bit my lip to stifle a laugh. He scowled and disappeared back down the hall. "That man still hates me," she whispered. "He hates anyone who reminds me who I really am." She grinned and poured 2 glasses of champagne. "To the bride," she said. "To the woman," I corrected. We clinked glasses. And for the first time since I'd come back home, I felt like I had a chance. Not because they'd changed, but because I had. The morning of the brunch arrived with stubborn clouds and a quiet tension in the air. Nathan had left at dawn for an out-of-town assignment, just one of those last-minute investigations that came with his job. He hated leaving me alone for it, but I told him to go. "I've got this," I'd said, convincing both of us. Now, standing in the dining room alone, steam curling from the coffee urn, I wasn't so sure. I'd set the table myself. Hand-tied linen napkins, vintage china borrowed from Danielle's aunt, and a citrus centerpiece that I'd arranged with shaking fingers. From the outside, it probably looked like I had it all together. But inside, I was humming with nerves. The first knock came at 10:07. "Julia, oh my gosh, you look radiant." My cousin Carla beamed, kissing my cheek before handing me a jar of her homemade preserves. "Peach and cinnamon. Figured it matched your vibe." "Thank you," I smiled genuinely. "That's sweet of you." More guests trickled in, an uncle, a few neighbors, even Mrs. Halberd from across the street, who brought lemon bars and immediately began talking about her cat's diabetes. The room filled with voices and laughter, clinking glasses and polite smiles. But I kept glancing at the hallway, waiting. And then they came. My parents walked in together, a perfect pair of contradictions. My mother in her favorite pearl earrings and a pastel scarf that screamed Southern matriarch, and my father in his pressed khakis, silent as ever. They didn't say hello. They didn't even nod. They simply took their seats at the far end of the table, like they were attending a funeral instead of their only daughter's celebration. I smiled tightly and poured another mimosa. "Julia, this scone is divine," Carla said, unaware of the frost creeping across the tablecloth. "Did you bake these yourself?" "I did," I said, still watching my mother as she methodically spread butter onto a biscuit, avoiding eye contact. Linda turned to the neighbor beside her, Miss Debbie, and with a smile said, "Well, Julia always did like a dramatic display." I froze. Miss Debbie laughed awkwardly. I decided not to respond. I just offered the fruit platter to the next guest like nothing had happened. Small wins, I reminded myself. A successful brunch, polite conversation, that was the goal. But every now and then I caught snippets. From my father to another guest, "No, Nathan couldn't make it. Seems like work always comes first with him." From Linda to my aunt, "She didn't consult us about any of this, just showed up with a ring and a plan." I kept smiling. Carla nudged me at one point and whispered, "Ignore them. Everyone else sees what they're doing." Did they? I wasn't sure. The room had the hum of Southern politeness, but underneath it I could feel the eyes, watching, judging, wondering if I was the villain in this narrative my parents had quietly been writing for years. Still, I served the quiche. I refilled glasses. And when the time came to thank everyone for coming, I stood up straight and lifted my voice just enough to carry. Thank you all for being here. I know not everyone agrees with how I'm planning this next chapter of my life, but I'm grateful for every smile, every kind word, and every person who showed up today with an open heart. It was subtle, but it was a message. My mother sipped her tea without expression, but I saw it, the tiny flicker of her eyebrow twitching. A crack. After everyone left, I stayed behind to clear plates. The house was quiet again, too quiet. I stepped into my childhood bedroom to drop off a tray and paused. Something smelled wrong. Smoke, faint, barely there, but real. I looked around, heart pounding. Nothing seemed off. The curtains were fine. The trash bin was empty. I opened my old closet and nearly dropped the tray. A puff of burnt air escaped. My throat closed. There, hanging half off the rod, was my wedding dress, or what remained of it. The delicate lace bodice was charred, the satin skirt blackened and curling at the edges like dried leaves. Smoke stains licked up the hem like fingers. I staggered back, covering my mouth. The tray clattered to the floor. For a moment the world tilted. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Then the sobs came. Violent, aching, collapsing sobs. I sank to the floor beside the dress, crumpled in a heap of disbelief. It wasn't just ruined, it was burned. Someone had opened that closet, lit that match, and walked away. The smell wouldn't leave me. Even after I closed the closet door, even after I opened the window and let the breeze roll in from the garden, it clung to my skin, my hair, my lungs. Smoke and scorched silk. The scent of a dream deliberately destroyed. I sat on the edge of my childhood bed, gripping my phone with trembling hands. I didn't know what I was supposed to say. I tried calling Nathan 3 times, but each call went to voicemail. His cheerful recorded message felt like a cruel contrast to the disaster surrounding me. So I did what I hadn't done in years. I left a message where I let myself break. "Baby, it's gone," I whispered, my voice raw. "The dress, someone burned it. It was in my closet and now it's just ashes and blackened threads. I don't know who, but I can guess. And I don't know how to breathe right now." I hung up before the sob caught in my throat turned into a scream. I stayed there for a long time, staring at the closet. My hands were filthy, ash smeared on my palms, bits of black thread under my fingernails. I touched it. Like maybe it wasn't real, like maybe I'd imagined it. But I hadn't. I knew what I saw. And worse, I knew who I was becoming, not the weeping daughter, not the passive peacekeeper, something colder, something sharper. A woman who'd had enough. I changed into a fresh shirt, tied my hair back, and took the scorched remnants, carefully, gently, into a tote bag. I didn't cry again. I was past crying now. When Nathan called back that evening, I was standing in the kitchen, scrubbing soot from my fingertips like it would undo the grief. He sounded breathless. "I just heard the message. Are you okay? Where are you?" "I'm home," I said flatly. "And no, I'm not." He was silent for a second. "Tell me what happened." So I did, every word. How I found the smoke, the ruined dress, the cold certainty in my gut that someone had done it intentionally. "They didn't even confront me," I said, voice shaking. "They went for what mattered most, quietly, cowardly." Nathan's voice dropped into something I'd only heard a handful of times, his investigator tone. "Where's the dress now?" "In a bag in the laundry room." "I'll be home by morning," he said. "We'll go through it properly." "I already know it was them," I whispered. "I know, but feelings don't hold up in court. Evidence does." I blinked. "Court," he sighed. "Jules, this wasn't just sabotage. This is arson. They burned something you owned. They entered your space and set fire to it. That's not family drama, that's a crime." The word crime echoed in my head like a warning bell, because he was right. This wasn't an accident, and it wasn't a petty jab. It was a line crossed. Later that night, I found myself standing in the hallway outside my parents' bedroom. The house was dark, quiet. I could hear the low hum of the fan in their room, the occasional creak of the floorboards under their heavy bed frame. I could have walked in. I could have demanded answers. But I didn't, because this time I wanted something more than an apology. I wanted proof. By the time Nathan pulled into the driveway the next morning, I hadn't slept. Not really. I'd lain on the couch with a blanket pulled tight over me, the tote bag containing the burned remains of my wedding dress sitting on the coffee table like a coffin. Every so often I'd glance at it, wondering if it would suddenly turn back into what it had been. Ivory silk, delicate lace sleeves, a future, but it never did. Nathan walked through the front door without knocking, still in his travel clothes. He looked tired, serious, but when he saw my face, his jaw clenched in a way that made me feel both protected and achingly sad. He came straight to me and pulled me into his arms. "I'm so sorry," he whispered into my hair. "You shouldn't have had to face this alone." I shook my head against his chest. "I'm just glad you're here." We didn't speak for a while. We just stood there, holding each other in the quiet of a house that didn't feel like mine anymore. When we finally pulled apart, Nathan looked at the tote bag. "May I?" he asked. I nodded. He unzipped the bag carefully and pulled out a pair of gloves from his coat pocket, thin, latex, standard issue. He'd brought a small evidence kit, too. Seeing it spread out on the kitchen table was surreal. "I know this feels clinical," he said gently, swabbing a section of the scorched zipper. "But this is how we get to the truth. No guesses, no gaslighting, just facts." I watched as he placed tiny pieces of the dress into labeled bags, dusted the metal hooks, and used a thin brush to lift a faint fingerprint from the interior tag, just visible under the soot. "There's a good chance whoever touched this last left something behind," he said, focused. "And if I can get a clear print, we can run it." He didn't have to say it. We both knew who he was expecting to find. Nathan paused, eyes still on the dress. "You do want to know for sure, right?" I nodded slowly. "Yes, I need to hear it from more than my gut." And I did. Because once someone sets fire to your dream, you stop trusting instinct alone. Nathan packed up the evidence and called a colleague at the precinct. "I'll run this in person," he told me. "Shouldn't take more than a day or two. I'll make it a priority." He turned back to me and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. "What will you do while I'm gone?" "Try not to burn the house down," I said, managing a half smile. "Save that for the courtroom," he replied. He left soon after, the evidence kit tucked under his arm like a quiet promise. And I sat there in the kitchen, staring at the empty teacups from yesterday's brunch, the ones my parents had used, still sitting on the counter. I picked one up and placed it gently in the sink. Then I picked up the other and dropped it. It shattered. Not on accident, not out of rage, but with the calm clarity of someone who finally understood. This wasn't just about a wedding dress, or a garden brunch, or harsh words in a living room. This was about a family that had been cracking for years and me finally walking away from the debris. 2 days later, Nathan came home with an envelope. It was sealed, unmarked, and heavier than it should have been for something made of paper. He held it in both hands, his expression unreadable. I was in the kitchen wiping down the counter, though there was nothing left to clean, just nerves I couldn't scrub away. "Is that it?" I asked, my voice quieter than I meant. He nodded. "It's confirmed." I didn't ask if he was sure. I could see it in his face. He laid the envelope on the table and opened it with deliberate care, like he was defusing a bomb. Inside were 2 fingerprint reports and a small plastic evidence bag with a print lift taped to the top. He pointed to the print comparison sheet, his finger steady. "Clear partials from the zipper and inner fabric seam," he said. "And they match." "To who?" He hesitated, then slid the sheet toward me. "Linda Watkins, George Watkins, both, not just one, both of them." I stared at their names printed in clean black ink. Cold, official, final. For a long moment, I couldn't move. Couldn't speak. Nathan sat across from me, watching carefully. He didn't reach for my hand this time. I think he knew this wasn't a moment to be comforted. It was a moment to burn. "They both touched it," I said at last. "More than touched," he replied. "Based on the way the dress was burned, multiple ignition points, they worked together, or at least they both knew." It was a strange kind of pain, one that didn't scream. It just settled, low in my stomach like a stone I'd have to carry forever. I had expected it, but seeing it changed something. "I need to talk to them," I said. Nathan's eyes narrowed. "Are you sure you want to go alone?" "No," I said, "but I need to do it anyway." He studied me for a beat, then nodded. "I'll be there, but we do it right, by the book, calm, documented." I blinked. "You want to record it." "I'm not arresting anyone yet," he said carefully. "But I am walking in with my badge. They need to see this is real." And suddenly it hit me. We weren't just the hurt daughter and the supportive fiancé anymore. We were the plaintiff and the investigator, and they were no longer just difficult parents. They were suspects. Later that evening, Nathan changed into his uniform. He clipped his badge to his belt and slid his department recorder into his coat pocket. Everything about him was calm, collected, formal. I changed into jeans and a dark blouse. No makeup, no armor, just myself. We drove the 10 minutes in silence. The Watkins home looked the same from the outside. The white shutters, the hummingbird feeder, the trimmed hedges. But everything inside me had changed. Nathan turned off the ignition and looked at me. "You don't owe them anything, Jules. This isn't about closure, it's about truth." I nodded. We stepped out of the car together, walked up the porch stairs, and knocked on the door. The door opened slower than I expected. Linda stood there in her pressed blouse, holding a glass of iced tea like we were dropping by for lemonade. Her eyes narrowed the moment she saw Nathan in uniform beside me. "Well," she said, voice clipped. "Looks like someone brought backup." I didn't smile. "Is Dad home?" "He's in the den," she said. "Though I imagine you'd like to stage this little scene in the kitchen, wouldn't you?" Nathan stepped forward. Calm, steady. "Mrs. Watkins, we're here to speak with both of you, officially." Her lips tightened, but she moved aside. We walked in together, and for a brief second I could smell the past. Citrus cleaner, overboiled tea, a faint trace of magnolia. The kitchen looked exactly as I remembered it, except everything in me had changed. George was already seated at the table when we entered. He glanced up from his paper, expression unreadable, and lowered it when he saw Nathan. "Didn't realize this was a police matter," he muttered. Nathan stepped beside me and spoke with measured professionalism. "Mr. and Mrs. Watkins, this is a voluntary conversation, but I am here in an official capacity. I'd like to record this discussion for clarity. You have the right to decline." Linda rolled her eyes. "Oh, please, are we being interrogated now?" George didn't say a word. Nathan activated the recorder, placing it on the table. "Julia has something to show you." I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope. I laid it down gently in front of them. "This," I said, "is a fingerprint report. It confirms that both of you touched my wedding dress, the one that was found burned in my childhood closet." Linda flinched just slightly. George looked down at the envelope but didn't touch it. "I don't want excuses," I continued. "I don't want vague denials. I want the truth. Did you do it?" George exhaled through his nose, folding his arms. "You think we'd ruin your dress? Out of what spite?" Nathan spoke evenly. "The evidence shows your fingerprints on the scorched fabric, multiple prints, consistent with deliberate handling." Linda scoffed. "Well, of course our fingerprints are on it. It was in our house. Who knows how long it's been hanging there?" I stared at her. "It was brand new. I'd only brought it 2 days before the brunch." Silence. She sipped her tea. "You burned it," I said quietly. "You didn't want a brunch. You didn't want a wedding. You wanted to erase it." Still, she said nothing. Then Nathan opened the folder and slid it across the table. Inside were the print lifts, comparison charts, and images of the burn damage. "Mr. Watkins," he said firmly, "these are not ambient touches. The prints are in placement patterns consistent with manipulation, handling, intentional movement, including along the zipper where the fire was most concentrated." George's lips parted, just barely. And then Linda broke. "Oh, for heaven's sake." She snapped, slamming her glass down. "You want truth? Fine, yes, we touched it because it didn't belong there. It was a joke. You planning some grand garden party in our house without so much as asking." I flinched. "Your father moved it to the hallway," she went on, bitter now. "And I said, fine, leave it in her closet until after the brunch. But then you had the audacity to stand up and act like a guest in your own home, like we were intruders." "You're saying you moved the dress?" Nathan asked. "Together." Linda's jaw tightened. "Yes, we moved it. We didn't burn it." "But it was burned," I said. "Not torn, not damaged, burned." George finally spoke, his voice low and brittle. "We were lighting candles. A breeze came through. Things happen." I stared at him. "You want me to believe that a candle accidentally leapt across the hall into the closet, set fire to the hem, and no one noticed?" He didn't answer. Nathan reached forward and closed the folder slowly. "At this point, I could pursue criminal charges. Arson, property damage, but Julia has the right to choose how we move forward." Both of my parents looked at me then, not with fear, but with contempt. And maybe, beneath that guilt, maybe, I took a breath. "I'm not pressing charges," I said, "but I'm also not pretending this didn't happen. From this point forward, you are not involved in my wedding. You are not invited. You You will not contact me unless I initiate. Linda snorted. You're cutting us off over a dress. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. No, over years of control, cruelty, and contempt disguised as parenting. George looked away. Nathan turned off the recorder, and I stood up. This was your chance, I said, voice steady. You could have told the truth. You chose pride instead. I walked toward the door, Nathan beside me. But just before I stepped outside, I turned back one last time. I would have forgiven you, I said softly. But now, you'll never get the chance again. The silence in the car on the ride home wasn't heavy. It was cleansing. Nathan drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting gently on my knee. Neither of us spoke, but the space between us was full of understanding, of relief, of something like peace. The kind that doesn't come from winning, but from walking away. I stared out the window as the streets of Charleston rolled past. The sweet gum trees, the old brick churches, the quiet porches with rocking chairs. Somehow the city looked different now. Not like a trap, not like a memory I had to carry like a burden, but like something I could finally take back. When we pulled into the driveway, I didn't go inside right away. I stood by the porch steps, letting the wind tug at my hair. I felt tall, not small and scrambling and desperate for approval like I had when I first arrived. Nathan watched me from the top step, his eyes soft. You did what most people can't, he said. You looked them in the eye and told the truth. I turned to him. I didn't just tell them the truth, I told myself. That night we made pasta from scratch. I turned on music, something upbeat and unapologetic, and danced in the kitchen barefoot while the sauce simmered. Nathan laughed, twirling me under the glow of the pendant lights. It was the first time in weeks I didn't feel like I had to defend my happiness. I let myself feel it, really feel it. And when I fell asleep in his arms, I didn't dream about fire, or my mother's voice, or empty closets. I dreamed about river light, and peonies, and walking down an aisle without looking over my shoulder. The next morning, I stood in front of a small boutique on the other side of town. The sign in the window read, Madeline and Rose Bridal Atelier, Black-owned, woman-owned, bold as you are. Danielle had sent me the link that morning with a one-line message, go get your real dress. I walked in, and the scent of lavender and new fabric met me like a welcome. A woman with honey-colored locks and a tape measure around her neck greeted me with a radiant smile. You must be Julia. How'd you guess? You've got that burn down and building it better glow. I laughed. For real. She led me into the showroom where soft gowns floated on brass racks like ghosts with second chances. I ran my fingers over one, champagne silk with floral embroidery across the waist. Not the style I'd have picked months ago, but something about it whispered, this is who you are now. When I stepped into the fitting room and slipped the dress over my shoulders, I didn't feel like I was putting on a costume for a role I needed to earn. I felt like I was stepping into myself. The mirror didn't lie. I looked strong, graceful, grounded. The woman clapped her hands once. That's the one. I turned slowly, watching the fabric shimmer in the light. Yes, I whispered. It is. 2 days later, I met Danielle for lunch and handed her a white envelope. What's this? She asked, raising a brow. I need a maid of honor, someone who knows the truth, who stood beside me when things got ugly and still chose me. She blinked, tearing up. Girl, of course I'll say yes, but if you ever make me wear seafoam green, we're done. I laughed. Deal. We clinked glasses over lemonade and creamed shrimp toast, and for once the future didn't feel like something fragile. It felt solid. Rooted, real. We spent the afternoon sketching out final details, small venue, local jazz, a garden bouquet. Not because I was rebuilding the old plan, but because I was choosing what to carry forward. On my terms. As the sun dipped low, I looked at my phone. A message from my mother blinked at the top of the screen. We're sorry. We didn't mean to hurt you. Can we talk? I stared at it for a long moment. Then I hit mark as read and closed the app. The morning of the wedding, the river whispered. I stood behind the chapel, staring out at the water, watching how it shimmered in the golden light. Cypress trees framed the banks, and moss swayed gently with the breeze, like nature itself had shown up early to bless this day. Inside, the chapel hummed with soft music and quiet voices. Cousins chatting, Danielle running point with the florist, Nathan's sister adjusting her baby's tiny bow tie. People who wanted to be there. People who had chosen joy, not control. That mattered more than I could have ever known months ago. The dress hugged my body like a secret I was finally ready to share. The fabric shimmered with hints of gold in the sunlight, but it was the weight of it that grounded me. Not heavy, but present, like dignity you wear on your skin. Danielle slipped in behind me, holding a bouquet of wild flowers and fresh garden roses. "Ready?" I looked at her and smiled. "Yes, I've never been more sure of anything." She brushed a hair from my cheek. "You know they're here." "I know." My parents had taken seats in the back row. I hadn't invited them, but I hadn't banned them either. I knew they'd come quiet, unspeaking, maybe even hoping for a scene. But this wasn't their show. Not anymore. They were just spectators now. When the doors opened and the music changed, I stepped inside. Gasps rose softly, some joyful, some just surprised. But I didn't focus on any of that. I focused on Nathan. He stood at the altar in a navy suit, calm and unwavering like he always had been. Like a lighthouse in the storm of my old life. As I walked toward him, my eyes caught a flicker in the back row. My father's hands clenched in his lap, my mother dabbing at her eyes with a tissue she hadn't earned. I gave them nothing. Not anger, not smiles, just silence. That was my power now. When I reached the altar, Nathan took my hands. "You're stunning," he whispered. "I'm free," I whispered back. The officiant began, but I barely heard the words. My heart beat too loud, steady and fierce in my chest. I wasn't just getting married. I was reclaiming my voice, my space, my right to build love without apology. When it came time for the vows, Nathan went first. "I saw you when you weren't trying to be seen," he said. "And I love the strength you hid, even from yourself. I don't want to fix you, I want to walk beside you as you grow." The guests sighed. Someone behind me sniffled, probably Danielle. Then it was my turn. I was taught that love was something earned, conditional, fragile, I said, my voice strong. But you showed me that love when real is steady, unflinching, and mine to choose. Today I choose you without fear, without doubt, and without needing anyone's permission. We exchanged rings. The chapel roared with applause, and just like that, I stepped into a life I'd made with my own hands. 1 year later, the backyard smelled like grilled peaches and Carolina spice rub. The patio was strung with soft yellow lights, gently swaying as kids ran between picnic tables and folding chairs. Music played from the Bluetooth speaker tucked beside the hibiscus bush. Aretha, then Etta, then a little Stevie for good measure. The playlist Danielle and I made at 1 a.m. with too much laughter and not enough wine. Nathan stood at the grill, spatula in one hand, a dish towel over his shoulder like he was hosting a cooking segment. "You sure these ribs don't need a backup chef?" he called over the chatter. "You're on thin ice," I shouted back. "The last time you said that, we had guests gnawing on charred hopes and dreams." Laughter broke out across the yard. This was our new tradition, our Sunday barbecue. Every month, a chance to gather the family we'd chosen. Friends, neighbors, nieces, nephews, co-workers who'd shown up for us when others tried to break us. I walked across the yard with a pitcher of lemonade in one hand and a bowl of potato salad in the other. Danielle intercepted me halfway, sunglasses on, sundress swishing. "You seeing this?" she said, nodding toward the corner where Tina's youngest was braiding an ant's hair while Nathan's sister taught someone how to two-step on the grass. "I see it. You built this," she said, "with backbone and bruises and a whole lot of grace." I smiled. "And you handed me the hammer when I forgot I had won." She bumped her shoulder against mine. "Still proud of you. Every time I come here, I remember who you used to be and who you are now." I glanced toward the mailbox. There it was, like always, an unopened card. Every holiday, every birthday, every anniversary, they sent one, my parents. Always the same, white envelope, formal handwriting. Neat return address label like it meant something. I never opened them. They weren't an apology. They were a performance, an invitation to guilt. A hook wrapped in sentiment. So I kept them, neatly stacked in a drawer, unread, unneeded. Nathan joined me on the porch as the sun began to dip. "You good?" I looked around the yard at the faces glowing in golden light, at the kids playing tag with grass-stained knees, at the soft sizzle from the grill and the easy hum of peace. "I'm good," I said. "Really good." He slid an arm around my waist. We didn't talk about the past anymore. Not because we were avoiding it, but because it didn't own us. That chapter was closed. I'd walked through fire. I'd watched everything familiar go up in smoke. But I came out with more than scars. I came out with freedom.